Okay, thank you, Karen. Thanks everyone for coming here, and it's very exciting to talk about this one today. Just as an expectation of what you should come out of this with, static sites are still something that's a little bit unfamiliar to many. So just if you come out of this session just with an understanding of what a static site is, how that might help in your WordPress setup, then that'd be great. All right, so a little bit about me. It's my little WordPress dating profile here. Yeah, I left Australia when I was 20, traveled around the world and did a bunch of sort of tech-related work for different places. And here I am. OK, so static websites, we'll start off with what they are. OK, and then we'll move on to how you can go about getting one, how you can go about converting your WordPress site into a static site, and whether or not that's actually going to be suitable for the type of website that you've got. OK, so if you look at a static site and you look at a dynamic site, this is part of the what are they, you shouldn't really notice any difference when you're looking at it as a user. Visually, there's no difference. And again, looking at the code, no difference at all. So it's still a bit mysterious now. So what is a static site? What is the difference? All right, here's a little hint. If you've ever been to a project hosted on GitHub, and the URL is something.github.io, then you're looking at a static site there. But the real guts of it, the real difference between a static site and a dynamic site is a static site is pre-generated. And we'll look at WordPress as an example here. So when you've got your WordPress site and you create a post in your WordPress dashboard, that post content is living in the database. You've got a database. You may not be aware that you've even got a database. You just log into your WordPress and you add a post, and your user visits your site and they see that. But what's going on behind the scenes is that they go to your page, and it's making a request to your server and pulling this content out of your database. And all that takes not lots of time, but enough time that it can be a problem for a heavily viewed site, or a site that's got some performance issues because you've got lots of plugins and things running. Now, with a static site, you're getting rid of all that time. There's no time going and fetching different pieces of content from the server and doing other tasks in the background. As soon as a user goes to your page, boom, they've got the whole content right in front of them. In doing so, it uses very minimal resources. If you're hosting a static site and you get some media attention, or you get linked to on front page of Reddit or something like that, your site's not going to break a sweat. As opposed to if you've got a WordPress site and you haven't sort of planned for massive traffic and put it through tests, you can find yourself with a site that's offline. And it happened to a friend of mine running a charity last week. They got media exposure in the UK, got some television coverage, and their site's down. And that's the worst time, because you've got all these people, you've got the media attention, and they're coming to a blank page. There's lots of ways you can mitigate that just within WordPress itself. Most people that have been using WordPress for a while use some caching plugins, some things that will help with handling traffic. Another advantage with a static site is you can use that offline. So if you're a designer and you're building your WordPress site and you want to hand that to a client for approval or preview, you can put it on a USB stick, CD, if you still use CDs, hand it to them, and they can test the site out. You don't have to worry about whether the site's still online and what sort of version they're going to see. You take a snapshot, you give it to them, and they can approve that. I'm going to talk a bit later about a product that I make that allows you to take your WordPress site and turn it into a static site. And one of my main customer groups are people that are worried about security of their WordPress site. And again, there's lots of ways you can mitigate security when you're running a WordPress site. But for a lot of people, if you're a digital agency, you might have hundreds of sites, but you still don't have the resources to hire a full-time, security expert for your company. And so when you've got something that's so easily customizable like WordPress, any of your clients can, if they've got access to their site, they can go in and they can turn on plugins, they can download a plugin, they can copy and paste some random code they found on the internet. And that's the beauty of WordPress. It's so easy to add content, to get your site up, to modify it. But it comes with a lot of security implications. No one's checking the code that the plugin author made or the theme author made. And for a lot of us, it's not something we can do. I'm not a security expert myself. And my solution back in the day to create my product was, I don't want to have to deal with that security issue. So if I can take my WordPress content, keep it as it is, the beauty of rapid development, but then get rid of this whole security concern of hosting a WordPress site by taking it static, then that's great. And that's what I did. So the 3 main points of a static site: the security I've mentioned, performance, touched on it a bit, where especially when you've got lots of load on your site, you've got 10,000 people all at once. You can test your current website, your WordPress website. You can go to some online load testing tools that will simulate what it's going to be like when 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people all visit your site at once. And you may be interested to find how quickly it will fail, or it will start getting slower and slower to respond to each request. So the page is going to load slower, and we all know that slow page loads do not make for happy users. Once you've got a static site, you can throw crazy amounts of traffic at it, and again, you won't break a sweat. The last thing that I really like, one of my passions is open source, low resource computing. So like enabling people that may not be as fortunate to have the luxuries you have in Australia, or even if you're in Australia, not everyone has the money to spend on hosting, to spend on latest computers, all these sort of things. And static sites are really, really great in enabling you to I don't know, I guess you can have your really nice looking site that you built with WordPress and you put all your features into it, but you don't need to pay for hosting at all. There are lots of really good sites, hosting providers out there at the moment, where you can put a static representation of your website and host it for free, and with some extra benefits as well. I'll cover some of those providers later on. It's not the primary users of my software are not the ones looking for that free hosting, but I think it's a really exciting aspect. I've paid over the years, the last 10, 15 years, paying for hosting for WordPress. It would go up to, I don't know, from $40 to $250 a month, depending on the site. And when you can pay zero for that, that means you can focus those costs on more important things. And again, if someone's looking at your site, it looks visually exactly the same, whether it's static or dynamic, but you don't have to pay for it. That's a big bonus. Just to reiterate, security-wise, if you're hosting your site statically, you're not worried about your database credentials, you're not worried about your file permissions, and you're not worried about any vulnerabilities in plugins or anything like that. About the only thing you have to worry about is your main username and password for wherever you're hosting your site. All right, so this one might be a little bit more technical, but for anyone who is already using a caching plugin for WordPress, like W3 Total Cache, caching is great, and it solves a lot of problems. But in order for caching to work, though, you've usually got to have one person at least visit that page and run through it, allow it to do all that fetching in the back end, hitting the database, pulling your content out, and from that point on, subsequent visitors will receive that cached version. And So while you might have a really big site and it's really busy, some really large sites I've worked on utilize W3 total cache and but being that the site was so heavy, if ever the page content changes or something changes on the site that requires a non-caching request to happen, then that could be enough to really slow down that site again and cause you pain. So here are some of those providers that I mentioned before. Some that offer free hosting for your static site, and some of the ones in the top free layer are ones that have a free tier. So something like Amazon Web Services, you can host with their S3. It's just like a simple storage solution, and kind of like something like Dropbox. You put files in it, and people can access them. Specifically with this one, they make it very easy to host your site using that. Netlify is a really big thing at the moment. They've just got an extra $30 million in funding, and they're very happy for you to host your site for free on them, provided it's static. Their biggest market is not straight static sites at the moment. It's more something called the Jam stack, which I'll talk about in a bit more. But it's totally fine for a static version of your WordPress site. Very fast. We've got a global CDN, so you put your static site on Netlify, and your users in Australia, your users in America will get the best response time available to them. GitHub been in the news last week for a big outage that affected the whole world, it felt like. But there's still a good option for hosting your static site. GitLab, the more open source of them, and Bitbucket from the Australian company Atlassian. Pretty much all the cloud providers out there, so Google App Engine, Azure, all support static site hosting within their free tiers in some form. You've also got cool things like Firebase, and for anyone that remembers GeoCities back in the day, the new form of that, NeoCities, you can host a static site for free on them too. And with almost all of these options, you're not limited to using their their internal domain name. So if you've already got your site on www.myshoppingsite.com, that's fine. You can point your domain at these free hosts, and your users won't know the difference, except they might be getting the page faster. Some other options that are usually paid tiers are content delivery networks. So Bunny CDN, Key CDN, anything like that, all lend themselves quite well to static site hosting. One more I'll throw in there, which is if you're wanting to be a bit geekier and support a cool organization, is OpenBSD Amsterdam. They'll give you a server for $60 a year, $10 of which they donate to open source, and super secure, super minimal out of the box. Kind of a nice way to host your static site. And again, you're a bit, if you want to be in control, all these other options, the free options there at the top, they're hosted platforms. And so you can host your site for free there, but you can't have access to your own log files. You can't really get in there. If you're want to get geeky with it, then a cheap server, a cheap but solid server like the OpenBSD Amsterdam is a good option. You can install whatever you want on there, host a static site, but still have full control over the server. And one last point, which is kind of close to my heart. So last year I was doing a charity in the Philippines with my partner, and it was all around plastics cleanup and that sort of thing, which if you've been to Southeast Asia is a big problem. And it makes me think more about everything that we spend money on. And hosting is just another one of those. So $40 a month for hosting, it's not bad. For anyone that's working in Australia, you can afford that. But in order to pay that, it might be an hour, it might be 2 hours of your wage. And that's 2 hours of time per month that you might be dedicating just to pay for your hosting. And you don't need to. So that money can go somewhere better. Or take two hours off work each week. All right, this one's going to be more, it's just a concept to throw out there. It's quite a geeky sort of thing. So IPFS is something called the Interplanetary File System. It's really cool. And you think of it kind of like Bitcoin, blockchain, stuff like that, where it's a distributed, decentralized network. And you can also get a static site and put it on here. And this is not something that most of us are going to be looking at doing. It's not going to be a business case for us. But it's cool to think about in terms of, when you're in a country, we've seen the YouTube outage last week was Pakistan trying to block sites for their users. Hopefully, so far, we're not getting many sites blocked in Australia that we want to visit. But if that case ever happens, then you can put a static site on something like IPFS, and you're kind of resilient to those kind of governmental controls. So when you've got your WordPress site and you are publishing it out as a static site. Now, I'll just say here that when you're going static site option with your WordPress site, you're not giving up on WordPress. You keep using WordPress for what it's great for, which is the content management, the plugins, themes, the community. But your code goes out and it's all static HTML files. Just files in a folder. You'll have your HTML files, your CSS, your images, your JavaScript. And you can use a version control software, something like Git, and you can have a nice history of each time you publish your site out. You can put a name against it. You could be, this is the time we added the new widgets section, and then you've made 3 more publishes since that day, and then you realize, oh crap, we made a massive mistake and we lost all these images on our site. You can just quickly roll back to those 3 versions prior because you've got an exact snapshot of what your site was like at that point in time. So that's another benefit you get. The use case I see sometimes from digital agencies, again with hundreds, maybe thousands of client sites going back 10 years. WordPress presents a challenge in that you get a site from a client who is a great client, you love them, and you built their website, but they don't need any more work on it. There might be a small business, and their site serves them fine, or they're just not, they don't have the money to invest in it anymore. Now, when you've got their WordPress site, usually you're charging a monthly fee for maintenance and security a lot of the times. But if they don't want to pay that, you don't have to take their site down. So what you can do is, again, take a sort of snapshot of it, turn it into a static HTML site, keep that up there, don't worry about security, don't worry about even hosting costs for them, and they get to keep their site. Okay, so there's a lot of probably new words on this screen, and this is just the many, many ways that you can take any website, whether it's a WordPress site or another one, and convert it into a static site. So the first two, wget and httrack, are kind of built-in, either built-in or easily installable tools for a lot of operating systems. And these are kind of command line, more geekier tools. httrack has a user interface a lot of the time, and it's really really full-featured and comprehensive in terms of making an archive of a website. SiteSucker is a tool for Mac OS that I used to use many years ago, and that's, you just put in the address of your site, click a button, and it'll pull it all down and create a static copy of that. It won't do, as far as I know, I haven't checked recent versions, it won't do rewriting of your URLs or all your links in your site. And so it's good for taking an offline copy of your site and giving it to someone, but not so good for having a WordPress development server, taking a static copy of that, and then publishing it somewhere else. That's where WordPress plugins, and that's where one of those is a plugin that I create, and there's at least one more up-to-date plugin specifically for WordPress that you install. Put a couple of settings in, press a button, and it'll crawl through your site, extract each page, rewrite the links that you want for your new site, and give you that static copy. And there's also at least 3 companies that are quite new and quite interesting out there at the moment. So Shifter, Stratic, and HardyPress. And they're kind of like a hybrid approach. They're a WordPress-specific hosting company, but they serve the content statically. So you log in and you manage your site through them like you would any WordPress site. But behind the scenes, they're making a static copy of it to serve. And they address some of the issues automatically that you would otherwise have to manually work around taking a WordPress site to a static site. Yeah, really quite interesting. So a bit more secure in that sense. Last on that list there is the Jamstack and WordPress. And I mentioned before Jamstack is something that Netlify's big user base is about. And the Jamstack, here we go. Jamstack stands for JavaScript APIs and Markup. So kind of like the trendier way to build a website these days is to have a totally sort of offline site. So it's a static site in nature, but for things like getting the content, for having user comments, for having e-commerce or anything that's kind of a bit dynamic in the site, you'll hit an API from various services and use those on your static site. And in the case of WordPress, it plugs into a lot of these Jamstack setups. Like a modern front-end framework or static site generator like Gatsby.js is a common one. You can use your WordPress site as a data source. So WordPress exposes an API since I don't know how many versions ago, which makes it really easy for you to take your content from WordPress and use it on another site. In that case, you're not going to be getting the theme, so it's not going to necessarily look the same as what your WordPress looks like. You'd just be purely using it for adding and managing your content, which is, again, what WordPress is really good at. So to go static from WordPress, for the majority of WordPress sites that are out there, I would say that they're fairly easy to do, with the only consideration needing is to deal with your contact form. Most websites will have at least one really dynamic aspect, which is your contact form. And when you've no longer got a server-side language on your server, you don't have PHP on there anymore once you go static. So there's nothing to sort of handle the submission of your contact form. And there's a few good solutions out there. If you're hosting with Netlify, all you need to do is add an extra attribute, I think it is, to your form. So if you're comfortable to go into the source code, you can add a little attribute to your form, and they'll automatically intercept anytime a user submits your form, and they'll email it off to your email address of choice. It's really, really nice. In other cases, there's some plugins you can get for WordPress that will automatically convert your contact form 7, which is a plugin that almost all WordPress users are using for their contact form. And it'll convert that to submit to a service like FormSpree, which is, again, remote sort of form processing. Other sort of dynamic things you might have on your site, comments. So comments more for a blog, business sites maybe not so much, but even when you're using WordPress in its default state, a lot of people have been using third-party comments systems like Disqus for some years, and that works just the same way on a static site because it's not running on your server, it's running somewhere else. It's very seamless. Search is a bit of a trickier one. So usually your WordPress site, you've got built-in search in your theme, it hits your database, and it's got a powerful text search. So to get that same functionality with a static site, it needs to know the content of your site first, and it needs to sort of index that for easier searching. And that's where a company at the moment, Algolia, is doing a really good job, and they're really popular and quite easy to create. Options are something like Google Custom Search, I think it's called, where you basically have a mini version of Google running in your site. E-commerce, you're not limited when you go static with your WordPress site. You can use something called Snipcart, which is a really nice JavaScript-based shopping cart. It works with their hosted platform, does all the payments and everything. And last one there, user accounts. So if you're running a membership site, that might be more of an issue. There are solutions out there, again, popularized with the Jamstack. So thanks to the Jamstack, we're getting a lot of solutions to the typical static site as well. All right, so static site generators, I'll skip a bit. My product I'm going to talk about in a moment is called WordPress Static Generator. We know this from the talks topic. And there's a lot of static site generators out there that you don't use WordPress at all. You just start out of the bat with one of these tools. And usually the way they work is you'll manage your content just as a bunch of files. And these might be markdown files, just text files. You can just open them up in TextEdit, make some changes. Usually run a command on the command line, and it'll produce your whole. They're generally really fast, and they're generally something you got to run from the command line, which can be a bit intimidating if you're used to WordPress. So I guess they're more popular with those that really want to pursue a development path. If you want to see, there's static site generators in pretty much any language out there. So if you like PHP, if you like Ruby, if you like Python, there's one out there that'll do the job, and they're getting better and better. And you can go to staticgen.com there and see which ones are the most popular. Why we don't use them? Again, it might be that was fear, or just you just don't want to have to deal with the command line, which is understandable. And that can be a big turnoff for using a static site generator. WordPress is still brilliant at what it does. It's, 30-something% of the web powered by WordPress. It's not, it's not just some random chance that people installed it. It works. It works great. It's great for content. And the plugin ecosystem, this community, really good. Ease of collaboration, meaning if you're a distributed team or you're outsourcing some work, you got content writers all over the globe, it's very easy to just give them an invite to your WordPress site. They can come in, they can have their different user levels, you can have editors, publishers, and such. And when you've got a static site generator, you're dealing with those, those files on a folder, which if you want to start sharing those around, then you're looking at putting those under version control, sending like a link to GitHub to your designer to update some text, and it's not as easy. The static site generators out of the box, they're quite good. They've got their ways. You put your content in this folder, your text files, you put your theme over here, run a command, generates it. And they're all designed to do that really well out of the box. But it gets tricky once you want to start doing customizations. The kind of things that in WordPress you might just install a plugin. You want to show a list of the top 10 posts, but you want to filter out a certain category. That's fairly easy to do now in WordPress. But with a static site generator, that could be fairly easy to it could be like a lot of customization to get it working. And again, back on the command line, these days if you're doing WordPress, and I meet a lot of people that are able to build really good sites without ever leaving the browser. They're not having to edit any code with an editor. They're using something like Divi or Elementor, and it works fine. All right, so this is artwork done by a developer here, so it's a bit rainbowy. So I created this product about 7 years ago. It solved a problem for me. I was doing a lot of WordPress sites for clients, and performance and security were an issue. I thought there must be an easier way. So I created this, and it got some users. It's on the WordPress repository. And then I kind of, I got out of WordPress development. I, did other things for many years. And then I noticed it still had all these users, and I wanted to do something with open source still. I was looking for a project to contribute to and realized, oh, okay, I've still got one, and it's got all these users, but it's in serious need of a refresh. So this is my full-time thing now. I develop this and try and make it as useful to the users as possible. And it takes the best of both worlds. So you've got your WordPress tool for your content, your collaboration, but you're getting rid of the security and the performance issues by publishing out to a static site. And those icons you see there on the brightly colored area are some of the deployment targets that you can use. So you'll install this plugin, choose where you want to host your new static site. And this can be your own server via FTP, Bitbucket, GitLab, Bunny CDN, all these ones there. It can be anywhere that you can put a static site. And in general, anywhere that you can put a dynamic site, you can put a static site. So if you're comfortable with your DigitalOcean setup, or whichever hosting it is that you like, you can just put your files in there and it'll work. I'll just give you a quick preview of what the interface looks like. Well, it's a bit full on there, lots of fields and things, but that's one of the benefits of it. You get a lot of control over not just taking your current site and putting it out as a static site, but you can modify a few things in between there. For example, if you've ever looked in the source code of your WordPress page, you might find a lot of stuff that you wouldn't put in there if you were making your site by hand. If you're hand coding your site, you wouldn't end up with all these maybe canonical links have a purpose, but you've got a lot of other things. If you're not using the WordPress API, you don't need links to the API in there. You may not be using feeds. So there's certain plugins that may get rid of what I dare to call a bit of cruft in your WordPress generated code. But this plugin also allows you to strip out things you don't need, and that's an optional step. You can also rewrite your paths. So one of the things that I really was interested in doing was using WordPress to generate websites, but kind of not telling the world that that's what I'm using for various reasons. One is if your site's easily identifiable as a WordPress site, it's very easy for bots to scour the net and say, OK, this is a WordPress site, so I'm going to start attacking the usual points that I think it have. With the plugin I wrote, I allowed to rewrite all of those paths. So you're stripping out the usual WordPress identifiers, but you're also doing things like changing all of your links that say, WP content / theme / divi / whatever, and totally making those whatever you want. Also with changing your URL structure, so you can completely rewrite the URL and have relative links or absolute links, which generally you can't easily do with WordPress. And on that, one more example there is for that squeezing that extra ounce of performance out. When you've got those really long links through your site, they start to add up. It's not a big amount of space, but these days you really want your site to be as fast as possible. And if you want to go crazy and get your source code as small as possible, then this can be an option where you can remove half of that. Alrighty, so I think we're going to start doing some questions and answers here if anyone's got anything.